Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining in with us today. We are excited to be hosting our very first Zoom webinar. So we appreciate your patience as we get started and hopefully get through the event without any technical difficulties. But just as a reminder to to you all today, I know there are a lot of you that are very familiar with the summit and who we are. We have several Advantage Club members that are joining in with us today. Those are people that are currently on our wait list here at the summit. I believe we have a few that are joining us from New York. We might have one or two from North Carolina. So we're real excited to have you all with us today. But again, just as a reminder, we are going to be taking questions and answers throughout the event today. And the way you can do that is through the question and answer box in Zoom, or there's also, I think, two places, a chat bar that you can submit your questions. So we'll be getting those and filtering through them. But we were picking topics for the upcoming webinar series. And as I've been talking to a lot of people over the past several months, I know that many of you are finding that you're at home and have a lot of changes to your normal routine due to COVID restrictions. And so we thought that being at home, having extra time, that downsizing is the obvious first topic to start with, because as you all are planning and making arrangements to, or even just beginning to think about moving and downsizing, we thought it'd be great to be able to present to you some topics to help get you kick-started with that. And so I'm going to introduce you to Jen McCabe. She is our, for those of you that don't know, she is the Summit's moving coordinator. We've been working with Jen for, I guess, 4 or 5 years, something like that. I always, when I introduce Jen, let people know that she's kind of a jack of all trades, or Jill of all trades, I guess you call it for the ladies. But in addition to helping with house dressing, having her business House Dressing, where she does staging and redesigning, she also does the moving coordination services. She's a nurse. She's a real estate agent. So she really is just a wealth of information. And I know that the residents who have already moved here to the summit have really enjoyed working with Jen and found her assistance to be really helpful. And so we're excited to hear from you today, Jen, and you know, get kind of let us know what you want to let us know.
Well, everything is different. Everything has changed. We've done this downsizing workshop many times in the past. Of course, I've done it for you and for your clients here and who are looking into the summit and other opportunities for moving to downsize. But it's always been kind of an interactive sort of thing, and we've given out things and we've, you know, made it lots different than this is. So this is a little different, but the concept is the same. There's no magic bullet. Downsizing is a chore, and there's nobody to do it for yourself but yourself. And so, you know, I think that's, people have a lot of time right now, and I suggest that they get started. I don't think it's ever too early to start downsizing. You know, anytime from 3 months to 2 years is a good time to start.
Do you think it's important to identify a time frame when they're thinking about moving forward in terms of months or years?
Yes, I do. And it's such a daunting task. I always tell people that they should get out a calendar. I mean, if you're serious about moving, you can get out a calendar and mark days on the calendar. And I don't think you need to work more than 2 days, maybe 3. Only 2 or 3 hours at a time max in the beginning, because it's kind of overwhelming. And as you begin the process, you find out what you don't know. So speaking of props, I think in the beginning, when you're going to start the process, it's a good idea to get a basket to keep all of your supplies in. And I always like something that's a handle that's easy enough to carry around. And I suggest to people that they get a notebook that has 3 sections. And I tell them, you know, you don't have to get this big a one, but I like a smaller one, but they're hard to find. But have 3 sections, and one section is going to be a list of things that you're going to keep, and the next section will be a list of things that you're going to donate. And then in the 3rd section of the notebook, I recommend to people that they keep a running list of phone numbers of important places that they think they're gonna wanna donate items to. Every place has changed, and I know.
I've been talking with people that
Yes.
are in the process of moving or getting ready to move, and I know a lot of businesses that were or organizations, charities that were taking donations and kind of postponed that. And so I know it's always important to kind of know what their expectations are, what their hours are, but I think it's probably just especially important now.
Right, and I think it's great to go on and list your favorite charities, or places that you think are gonna donate. Get their phone numbers, go ahead and call them and see what the policy is, so you'll have that in the back of your mind. And also, that section of the notebook is good for writing down questions that arise, because things are gonna come up, like they're gonna wanna know, well, if I have a mover, will they pack for me, or how much extra is packing, or who has the best boxes, or what are the hours for picking up boxes from the ABC store, and that kind of thing. People have all kinds of questions. But anyway, that notebook is a good thing to keep handy, and I also suggest little sticky notes. I like the square ones that you can write on, and I always say in the things that you're gonna keep one color for things that you're gonna keep, and then maybe another color for things you're gonna give to your family members, and that way you can keep it straight. And by all means, keep a running list of things you're gonna donate in that notebook. And that's another thing. You might think you're gonna donate something or give something to your niece or your nephew, but you need to call them and find out if they really want it.
Follow up. That's something we hear a lot. Someone said, I have, all these things that mean a lot to me, and I had planned to give them to, my children or my grandchildren or family, and they find that they just, really don't want that. So it's an interesting situation, I think. So it's important. I know you talk about expectations or, not having your feelings get hurt, that type of thing. So I don't know if there's specific advice when about that, or how to go about talking to your children or friends or family members you're thinking about.
Well, during the workshop, I always stop and say, this is not a time to sit in judgment about whether or not your children want your stuff, because you're going to get frustrated. And we talk about that a lot in the seminars. And another thing is they don't want their stuff, but it's not insulting, but lifestyles have changed so much. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important to realize that we enjoy things that we have, but it's okay for people not to want those things in the future. And please don't take it personally. It's best to move on and find a home for those things or give them away, but don't hold on to them. Oh, and I want to remind people that they're not their children's attic either. They can't continue to keep things.
We hear that all the time.
You cannot keep your children's things and forever. And I'm working with a lady right now who just could not get her daughter and her stepdaughter to commit to coming to pick up some furniture. So I suggested that she just call a mover and find out how much it would cost. And she called a private entity, and he said he would take it to Pennsylvania for X number of dollars. So she called her stepdaughter, and said, how about we split that cost? And that's a great suggestion. Mm-hmm. Well, interestingly, when it really came down to it, she said, well, I think I have a friend in the trucking company, and let me give him a call. And it turns out that they come this way all the time. So sometimes you just have to get the ball rolling.
Right. And it's okay to ask or go ahead and start promoting that, because that's something you have to figure out what to do. And I know there's a lot of people that I'm working with that say they have all of their kids' stuff. Not only do they have their mothers and grandmothers' furniture, but you also have the kids' memorabilia and different things like that they just never had room for. So having a plan is important, and knowing what to do with that. So you mentioned, the 3 sections in your notebook: keep, give away, and donate. Is that right?
Yeah, you really only have, I say, 4 choices. You can keep things, you can donate them or give away. And I say donate because that could be to charity, it could be to a loved one.
Right.
You can sell your items, which is kind of really gray zone. There are all kinds of ways to do
Right.
that. Or you can toss it. Yes, you can throw some things away. It's
Yeah.
okay to throw some things
That
away.
can be tough. I know that's a
Very
very
difficult.
hard one for
Very
some people.
difficult. Yeah, but you really only have 4 choices: keep, sell, donate, or toss.
Okay, good.
So-
Those are good key points. And by the way, for everyone listening in, we do plan to follow up with some practical printed notes and handouts. So you'll be getting that as a follow-up. So you can take notes and have something to match that up to later. But all right, so we're getting started. And you talked about the categories and things like that. So like, do we just pick a room, or what do you recommend for that?
I recommend to people that they start by working in an area that's not super important to them, maybe a shed or a guest room, a closet you almost never go into. And of course, the moment you open that closet door, you're going to be flooded with memories, and there are going to be all kinds of barriers that are going to prevent you from moving forward. And you have to remind yourself that if you haven't used those things in a year, then they're likely not, I mean, you're not going to use them. And, you know, I think Marie Kondo, who wrote this Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up, I mean, if you don't love it, if it doesn't serve you, and you haven't used it in the last year, then it needs to go. So even if you have all those board games, I mean, put them in a stack. But I would designate a space. If you think you're going to have a yard sale, or you think that you're that kind of thing, you might want to designate a space in the garage, or, you know, just one side of your garage, so that you can keep things under cover. But the best thing is to designate a room in the house, if you can, just to start putting things in that you know you're not going to use.
So I think a lot of people are thinking about downsizing and may not have a place that they're planning to move yet.
Right.
One of the questions that came in that I think is good, and you touched on it, but I think it's helpful to reiterate, but what should we set as a benchmark for keeping? And you mentioned the 4 things, you know, if you haven't, what were they again, if you haven't used it, or
Yeah.
say those again for us.
Do you love the item?
Do you love it? Okay.
Will you use it? Is it going to be used? And will it serve you in some way? And I always use the example of a beautiful antique chair that might actually be worth a lot of money. I'm not sure, that's not really, maybe that's not the best example, but a fragile chair, for instance, that you have sentimental value, but if you can't sit in it and use it safely in your new space, then you don't need to take it with you.
Right.
So
I think that's a really good point. So, and so another way, a question that came in is, what does it mean to think practically when deciding what to get rid of? So I think you've talked a little bit about that, but I don't know if you have any more specific advice about the practicality. I guess you did say using it. If you haven't used it, that's also important to know, because then you probably don't have a need for it.
that's correct. And I think when you're thinking about moving to a new space, you know that you're going to have your bed, your bedside tables, your chest of drawers, perhaps a bureau or with a mirror. And then in a living space, you know that you're going to have end tables, a coffee table, perhaps, you know, maybe another chest. So when you start thinking about what you know you're going to move in your new place, you know that you can fill those things, but you can't overfill them. I mean, that you only have that much space. So start thinking in terms of what's going to fit in the furniture that you're going to take.
And you know,
I
I'm
know.
laughing because we have had a few instances recently, and if we have some residents that ever want to give some testimonials about bringing too much stuff and what that looks like. But safety is important, and being able to navigate safely in your home is important.
Yes, and I think about that a lot. And one thing I hear so often is, I'm just going to take it and see if it works. And if it doesn't work, if you can't think of how it's going to work now, please don't bring it.
Right.
And you know, you only need one of things. You need one set of dishes, and you don't need all 12 place settings.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, unless you're moving into a large apartment with a great big dining room and you're planning to have family dinners, which really no one is doing at that point. Right. Usually.
Another question that came in that I think is really good to address is what do we do with the things that maybe don't have the same value they once did?
Yes.
China,
Yes.
that comes to mind right away.
Brown is down. That's sort of the, sort of the adage that I'm hearing. I also have seen so many people trying to do things with their beautiful crystal or their china, and it's difficult to sell. I can't tell you how much Waterford crystal I see in consignment stores, which I know is staggering, and I'm sorry about that. You either start using it and it breaks, or you share it with someone, or you try to sell it or give it away. I say, if you like it, use it.
It makes you happy.
If it makes you happy, use it. And if it breaks, then, you've used it. But don't, for goodness sakes, don't get hung up on that, because I can tell you it's difficult to
And
sell
it is
those
hard
things.
knowing that the things that once maybe was worth a lot of money, or you paid a lot of money for, was gifted to you,
Yes.
doesn't no longer have that value.
That's right.
Yeah.
It is hard, very difficult.
Another question that came in, someone wants to know, how does downsizing help us live with less worry?
Oh, gosh.
What does that look like? And I can probably chime into some things, but what have you seen as you've helped people through this process?
Well, when you have 5 lovely things on a shelf as opposed to 45 figurines, that makes a big difference in how much care you have to give your surroundings. You don't have to dust around that stuff. You don't have to worry about them breaking. I think that when you have less, you're just freer. You're just simply freer.
And I think a lot of it too, if I can add, is the process itself. I think about what I have to do at work and the things that overwhelm me. And I think once you actually start taking steps moving forward in downsizing and having a plan, that a lot of that worry about this is something I have to do at some point in time, a lot of that just goes away.
Yeah.
And of course, I hear this all the time, people that are moving into the summit, we should have done this a long time ago. And so I think that as you're approaching the downsizing and really just putting a plan in place, just having a plan oftentimes helps alleviate the initial stress and worry of how am I going to do this?
And once you start, momentum begets momentum. So, and the most difficult thing is overcoming inertia. I think once you get started in the process, then you're sort of intrigued by it, and you're also relieved that you're doing it. And so then you begin to set other goals, and you just have to get started, though. As I said, there's no magic bullet about this.
We talked a little bit about, the question was, what should we set as the benchmark for keeping? I think going back to that again, because this does happen a lot, but knowing, if you don't know your space, because this comes, we have people that are waiting for certain floor plans and certain size of apartments or houses, and if you don't know exactly what that is it better to start with the stuff you're not going to keep,
Yes.
and maybe start a process from there? Because I know you mentioned your keep it, donate it, sell it, toss it. If there are items, I guess that would maybe be the logical place to start, is the things that that aren't practical, you're not going to keep, and maybe start with that as a benchmark for moving forward.
Right. I think, like I mentioned, you might go to a closet that you don't use often, and maybe go through that closet first. Or an old, you might have a downstairs area that has lots of games, for instance. I have one client that is moving to the summit soon, and her passion is books. And so she went through her books, and she has hundreds of books. And hundreds of books, but she went through those first and culled out everything that she knows that she's not going to bring. And I that was wise, because those were heavy, and she got them out of the way. And then she began in a place that was really sensitive to her. But back to your question, you might also another client, actually, she still loves to play games, and that's a passion. So she went through and chose the 5 or 6 or however many she wanted to bring, and then she began to get rid of those. don't know if that really answers your question, but
I
there's so
think
many ways
so,
to
'cause
go
it's-
about it.
And then for those that do know the space, maybe they've gotten to the point, and for those that are asking about what Jen does at the summit, I'll be able to explain that quite thoroughly. But when you know the space
Right.
that you're going to, how do you go about picking and choosing at that point? So maybe you've cycled through your keep it items and you really know what you want to keep. How do you go about figuring out what you actually have room for?
Oh, well, that part is easy for me to give assistance with if I know the square footage. But in general, everybody knows that they need a table and chairs. They know they need 2 or 3 sitting areas in a living room, whether that's a sofa or not. Sofa and 2 chairs, or 2 large recliners and a love seat, and a chest of drawers maybe to keep things in. You do need to think about what is essential for your everyday living. And I think when people are coming here, of course, that's part of my responsibility. But if you're not, just think very common sense. Try to make yourself get rid of flimsy items. Anything that's flimsy, it should be sturdy, it should be safe. If you were to put your hand on it, would it be a safe place to land? If the chair has rollers on it, I don't recommend that for folks because of sliding.
Safety and
Right. A lot of people have TV trays, and that's fine, but that doesn't need to be your only mode of a way to eat. You should have something sturdy to eat on. I think that if you don't know your square footage, that's not an excuse not to begin your downsizing.
Right,
That's
okay.
important.
Yeah.
Because you still probably most people still have maybe 2 mixers, or maybe 3 toasters, or 2 toasters, or my goodness, I see people with crock pots of different sizes, and these things are not going to be necessary. 1 item of the things you use the most, not 2 sets of measuring spoons and 4 mixing bowls. Just go ahead and get started. And be very realistic with yourself. Very realistic.
Well, we are going to be wrapping up in just a few minutes, so I thought I'd give you all the opportunity, if you have some last minute questions that you want to ask, to go ahead and do so. One of the things that I use when I tell people about thinking about square footage, and you might be able to apply this rule to downsizing, you'll have to let me know what you think, Jen. But we always say, if you have, paint on your shoes or your socks when you wake up in the morning, and you've spent the day in your house, where would you have paint on the floor?
Oh.
And so I think when you're thinking about the rooms that have been untouched, those might be the easiest to start with because you're not using them already. And so I think, that might be something to think about, because the questions have come in from a couple of people, where do we start? Where do we begin? And I think it is easiest to start with the stuff you don't use. And that's easy to identify when you think about your basements and your attics and your closets and
Sheds.
guest rooms and sheds and things like that. So I think if that's one practical tip that I could add,
I've never
that
heard
might
that,
be.
and I love it. I'll be using that.
And that's what I always encourage people too, when they're thinking about their square footage and what they really need versus what they think they want. And sometimes those go hand in hand, needs and wants. But a lot of people, when you really start thinking practically about what your life will look like when you're downsizing, it is applying that common sense and really just thinking about what actually is needed. Because as you mentioned, sometimes just less stuff can really be freeing.
It's very freeing.
Yeah. So I don't think we have any other final questions that have come in. So I just want to take the opportunity to remind folks that we are still here at the summit. I'm still working. I've been doing a lot of virtual appointments, doing something similar to what we've done today, but having that be a little bit more interactive, being able to answer one-on-one questions. So if you're interested in setting up an appointment to find out some more details about the summit, what we have available, what our waiting list is like. I would be happy to answer all of those questions for you. And then also, as I mentioned, I am going to be able to send out some notes from Jen, practical steps and guidelines to get started. So I will be following up with you all via email. And then also for those Advantage Club members that are listening, that are interested, or others that are just really wanting to know what Jen's role is in moving you to the summit, I'll be happy to share that information. I have handouts for that as well, things that I can email and really talk you through the process, because we at the summit recognize the number one reason people don't move either to a retirement community or even just to a smaller, safer, easier living environment is because of the process of downsizing. And so anything we can do to make it a little bit easier, whether it's offering workshops and webinars like this or offering gym service when you're moving to the summit, that's what we were here to do. So thank you all so much for tuning in, and I'll look forward to following up with you later. Thanks so much.